Today is March 2nd, 2026. My name is Rob Carr of Kalamazoo Right to Life. This is Pro-Life Week. Well, today might be a little different. That I'm going to just look at a few news stories from the last few weeks and just make some general comments. And not all of them actually deal with the pro-life issues or with abortion. So let's get started. The first one I want to mention is the death of Jesse Jackson, civil rights leader, confidant, and a collaborator, aide, ally of Martin Luther King for many years. And when he passed away, there were a lot of accolades. He's a great American. He did so much for civil rights, which is all true. And I'm not taking that away from him. And I do think in many respects he was a great American. But the one area where I do kind of diverge from conventional accolades is that back in the mid to late 1970s, Jesse Jackson was 100% pro-life. He was a pro-life advocate. And he wrote articles in pro-life publications about how important it was to see that the unborn child was not strictly a black child or a white child or a Hispanic child, but a child born or created in God's image. He looked at the totality of mankind, not by racial groups. And he was pro-life. He was pro-life. But in 1984, and I've got to kind of shift gears a little bit here because I have seen over my lifetime Democratic politicians, and Jesse Jackson was a Democrat, Democratic politicians, when they seek the highest office in the land, when they want to become president, a lot of times they shift a little bit in their political philosophy, their position on issues. And very often we see this most clearly with the issue of abortion. And by 1984, the Democratic Party was heavily invested in abortion politics, pro-choice. And Jesse Jackson, I think, rightly knew that he would never be able to get the Democratic nomination in 1984 as campaigning as a pro-life Democrat. He would not have been able to do that. And obviously we know Ronald Reagan was reelected that fall, running against former Vice President Walter Mondale, a huge landslide. I think Mondale won his home state of Minnesota and the District of Columbia, but Ronald Reagan won all the other 49 states. I mean, it was a massacre. It was a slaughter. I mean, it was just, I think, based by the Electoral College, I think it was the biggest upset in American history. But Jackson, so Jackson shifts gears in 1984 and he becomes pro-choice. And I have a hard time with somebody who is spiritually and emotionally connected to an issue. Abortion is, it's either a hot or cold issue. You either defend human life or you unborn human life, or you think unborn human life is expendable. It has very little value. And Jackson was pro-life. But then in 1984, he abandoned his pro-life convictions and became pro-choice and remained pro-choice the rest of his life. So in that area of his life, he compromised for political gain. And obviously, we all know he didn't get the nomination. I think he tried again in 88, and he didn't get the nomination then either. So he compromised on a core conviction, the sanctity of human life, that he knows comes from God, the creator of all life. So I'm just going to end that with Jackson. That blemish, to me, is large, that he abandoned the pro-life cause. Number two, last week, the State of the Union address, Donald Trump. And I've seen a lot of addresses over my years. And originally I was going to watch about 5 or 10 minutes. Started late. I didn't want to stay up that late. But so I watched the first 10 minutes and then the first 15 and then 20 and then 25. Well, obviously I watched the whole thing. It was a great speech. Didn't talk about abortion. Did talk about transgender. But the one area that really stuck out with me was how the Democrats, they just cannot find a reason to agree with Trump. I mean, their hatred of Donald Trump is stronger than their love for our country. When you can't stand for somebody who might have got the Congressional Medal of Honor, or you can't stand for the U.S. hockey team, or you can't even stand when Trump says, "So stand with me if you agree with me that the first role of the government is to protect American citizens, not illegal immigrants." That's a no-brainer. That we as Americans our government should protect American citizens. But they couldn't stand. They could not stand for that. And let's face it, Trump set him up for a trap. I mean, they walked right into it. And you've got to believe that every single Republican running for U.S. Senate or U.S. House is going to use portions of that speech as a campaign ad against Democrats. They're going to do that because when you see people sitting on their hands, rather than there was even that woman whose daughter was killed in that subway in Charlotte, North Carolina, by this man who had been arrested multiple times and released with a no cash situation. And here's this grieving mom. And the Democrats couldn't even stand for her and acknowledge her grief. I mean, come on. Where is your humanity? And I'm not saying everything that the Republicans or Donald Trump does is perfectly A-okay. I'm not saying that. But there are some things sometimes that you have to stand and acknowledge, the situation. And that one, especially for that woman, was that moment. And they didn't stand for her. They didn't stand. But it was a great speech. I mean, I have to admit it was a great speech. Okay, number 3. This just happened on Saturday morning. The U.S. and Israel, the joint operation, they attacked Iran by air. And we've got tons of ships in the Persian Gulf, Mediterranean Sea, and we were lobbing a lot of rockets and missiles. Israel's plan was to take out the Iranian government, or their leaders, I should say. And U.S. plan was to knock out their nuclear capability and perhaps their military as a collateral damage. It's hard to say how this is going to turn out. And I'm not saying that I agree with every single part of this plan, but the Ayatollah in Iran in the last month killed over 30,000 of their own people who were protesting against the government. Now, you may complain about, up in Minnesota, Americans were arrested and 2 Americans were killed because they were protesting ICE, the misuses of ICE against illegal immigrants. And that may be fair. They abused their welcome. But in Iran, 30,000 people were killed in 1 month by the Republican Guard. Horrible civil rights violations. And if we can find a way to remove that government and to put in, and that's the big if, somebody who's more sympathetic to U.S. policy, can you imagine if in the next year or 2 we could get a government that could even recognize Israel? And, the Abraham Accords could be enlarged. Maybe Saudi Arabia is going to join, and some other Muslim countries. Iran could even join. Iraq. There is a great possibility for a Middle Eastern a détente that we haven't seen in our lifetimes. And I'm not saying it's going to happen because there's a lot of ifs involved in this attack. But so far, The leader of Iran has been killed, and we'll see what happens next. But and personally, I don't think they should bring back the Shah of Iran's son, the crown prince. I don't think that's the solution either. I think they need some other form of democracy or something other than an autocratic king or a sultan or a shah. I don't think they need some dynastic leader. They need something more democratic. Okay, last item, and this is where I'm going to kind of hone in on abortion. Tomorrow, down in Texas, there is a state primary that will determine who will be the two candidates, Democrat, Republican, for the U.S. Senate. Currently, John Cornyn has been the senator for 30 plus years, and he's being challenged by a lesser candidate who's in the state in the U.S. House, but he's being challenged primarily by the Attorney General Ken Paxton. And I have no stake in this race. I don't necessarily care. I understand Paxton has a lot of baggage, but Cornyn has some. He's kind of wobbly sometimes. He's not as solid as he could be. But I like Cornyn. I do like Cornyn, and I don't know enough about Paxton. So they're both pro-life. So whoever wins there, hopefully, will win in the U.S. Senate in November. But so I've got no skin in the game. I don't have any skin in the game. Now on the Democratic side, we have one of our favorites, Congresswoman. I lost her name now. Actually, let me go to her opponent, and I'll come back to her. Jasmine Crockett, that's her name. Jasmine Crockett. How could I forget her name? And she's a very bombastic, colorful, fire thrower. Very pro-choice, very, very pro-abortion. She's running against the soft-spoken state senator named James Talarico, who is a very kind of a religious guy, very kind of a liberal. I think he's a Presbyterian, liberal, pro-abortion, and he finds in the Bible justifications for him being pro-choice. He sees God as pro-choice, which is hard to believe, but that's how he sees Scripture. So you've got the Christian Talarico going against flamethrower Jasmine Crockett, and I mean I know I've seen a few commentaries. A lot of Republicans really would prefer that Crockett be the nominee because they think she's easier to beat because she's kind of a loose cannon, and I kind of agree with that. Talarico, because he's kind of mild-mannered, soft-spoken, polite, presents himself well, I think he appeals to moderates and independents more than she does. She will appeal to the progressive wing of the party and to the some of the crazy pro-abortion people in the party. But he's, and maybe this is why I kind of fear him more. He's more deceptive because he comes across like he's just like an altar boy or an Eagle Scout, just a straight shooter. But his politics are very liberal, and he's very pro-abortion, and he uses the Bible to defend it. And that's, I guess, the one area that really irks me is that he uses the Bible to defend his pro-abortion position. So tomorrow's the big race down there, and we'll see how it all plays out. I think you have to get 50% of the vote, or else there's a runoff election. So this may not be the end of everything, but the Senate race tomorrow will be an important race in our country. With that, I'll let you go, and I'll see you next time.